The poem Old Playhouse by Kamala was published in the year 1973. The narrator in the poem gives us a brief account of her unsatisfactory and disappointing conjugal life with her husband. She compares herself to a swallow and her husband to a captor who wanted to tame her and keep her fully under his control by the power of his lovemaking. The husband wanted to make her forget all those comforts which she might have enjoyed in her home before being married. But in addition to that, he wanted also to make her forget her very nature and her innate love of freedom by keeping her in a state of subjection to him. The narrator says that she had come to her husband in order to learn what she was, and by learning what she was, to learn how to develop her personality and her potential. But her husband had not made it possible for her to learn anything because he was a self centered man, and because his egoism prevented him from letting her learn anything except his own nature and disposition. He certainly made love to her, and he felt pleased by her bodily response to his lovemaking. He approved of her state of mind and her mood when he made love to her, and he felt pleased by the tremors of her body during the sexual act. However, he failed to understand that her response to his lovemaking was purely physical and therefore superficial because she never experienced any feeling of oneness with him. Continuing her account of her relationship with her husband, the narrator says that her husband had no notion of what love and affection for a wife were, and that he thought of a wife as merely a housewife and a sexual partner. In the course of the sexual act, he used to kiss her very hard, pressing his lips against hers and letting his saliva flow into her mouth. He used to press his whole body against hers with great vehemence, gratifying her sexual desire in the process. In the physical sense, he succeeded fully in penetrating every part of her body and making his bodily fluids mingle with hers. But he did not realize that, although her sexual desire had fully been satisfied, she remained emotionally unsatisfied and hungry. In the emotional and spiritual sense, he proved a complete failure because it never occurred to him that a wife needed love and affection in addition to sexual gratification. The persona in this poem also tells us of the domestic duties which she had to perform as a wife and a housewife. She used to put saccharine tablets into her husband's tea and give him the vitamins at the fixed time. Her husband was a hard taskmaster, and he was so conceited and egoistical that in course of time she lost her own identity as a human being because of her feeling of slavery to his wishes and whims. Ultimately, she got the impression that her personality, instead of developing, had been reduced in stature almost to nothingness. She even lost her own will and her faculty of thought, and to all his questions she mumbled incoherent answers. This narrow life of domesticity and sense of physical well being began to jar upon her, and she began to long for the inconveniences of her earlier life. The narrator was now feeling suffocated in her husband's home, in which his room was always lit by the artificial light of electric lamps and the windows of which were always shut. Even the air conditioner in his room provided no relief to her feeling of suffocation. Her husband's whole house reeked of his masculine breath. Even the flowers which had been cut from the plants and which had been placed in vases seemed to have lost their natural smell and to have acquired the smell of her husband's sweat. She no longer heard the singing of birds outside, and she began to feel that her mind was like an old and forsaken theatre hall which was no longer in use. Finally, the narrator expresses her inclination, and not only an inclination, but a determination to free herself from the prison of her husband's house and the loveless life of domesticity, which she had been leading there. She says that her husband is physically a strong man and that a strong man always uses the same technique, which is to keep his wife physically and sexually satisfied, but denying to her the love which she desperately needs, and the denial of which has the effect of killing her slowly. Kamala thus now compares herself to Narcissus, who fell in love with his own reflection, which he saw in a pool of water, and which subsequently haunted him, causing him an agony and a heartbreak because he could not enjoy the pleasure of sexual union with himself. Kamala Das now feels tortured by the intensity of her desire for love, which she never got from her husband. It is only by obtaining a release from the tyranny of her husband that she can end that torture. And that release may have to be achieved through suicide if no other method can be found.